Hello. Thank you to everyone who came to today's session. What we're going to be talking about today is red flags for students that may have been using AI, and also some issues with some of the popular detection tools and methods for detecting AI. It is not at all a straightforward process to figure out whether a student has used AI in completing an assignment, and it's even less straightforward to figure out whether they used it inappropriately, because there might be ways they could use it that could be completely legitimate. They might still have done the work and understand the content. Before we get started, is there anyone who had questions before we start talking about this? All right, I'm going to share my screen, and we can take a look at some of what is going on. All right, so the first thing we might want to think about is that this is not in any way a new problem. So even though AI is fairly new, the concept of people doing things to complete course content in some sort of a course that is not intellectually honest is not a new problem in education. So the study that's being cited here in this quote was conducted among high school students in wealthy, high-performing high schools. So it is not a precise comparison to a university, but the students that are cited in these studies are most certainly finding their way into universities and probably using a lot of the same techniques to complete their work. So these people have been studying various types of behavior among students for years, and one of the categories they look at is cheating. And they're not just asking, do you cheat? They're asking about different behaviors, like, did you look at the person next to you while taking your test? Did you copy something from another source without citing it? All sorts of different behaviors. And what they found is about 60 to 70% of students over a long period of time have reported using at least one type of cheating behavior in the previous month. And that percentage has stayed about the same over, I believe it's over 10 years they've been studying this. So the problem is not new. They have a new tool that could be used inappropriately, but this behavior among students of looking for a way to complete work without doing some of the things that they were expected to do is not a new phenomenon. One thing that you will probably find, and have probably already found if you've had students use AI in completing their work, is that a lot of what they are turning in is probably not the world's highest quality work. In other words, it probably isn't standing out as the very best paper in the class if they just plugged it into ChatGPT and turned it in. There was an attempt to publish a study at MIT claiming that AI could complete college-level work. And within about an hour, a group of students at the university found that the study was not correct. And this is fairly much to be expected, because what ChatGPT and these other models are doing is not really thinking. They're looking at data and they're trying to assemble it together to come up with, a plausible answer to your question. But they're not really able to reason and think the way that people can, and their ability to analyze things is just not the same as with a human. It will make a lot of stuff up, and it will say a lot of things that sound good, but only make sense if you don't actually understand the topic. A survey came out and it said that 68% of instructors at the K through 12 level were using an AI detection tool. And there were probably also a very large number of people using these different tools in universities. Carlow has a tool for this purpose. It's through the Turnitin program that we already have. And Carlow has left that feature turned on within Turnitin. It is available to you. However, there are a lot of universities across the country that have not left that tool turned on, that have flipped off the permissions for that tool. And the reason they've turned it off is because so many people are misusing it. And what we're going to look at is what that means. Basically, the tool is not an ironclad guarantee that somebody plagiarized. So if you run something through Turnitin or through any of the dozens of different tools that exist for detecting AI, it does not guarantee with any real certainty that that student did use AI to write the content. Asking ChatGPT if this content was written by ChatGPT is not necessarily an accurate way of finding out the answer, because ChatGPT doesn't necessarily know the correct answer to that question. So let's take a quick look at what's going on with these different detection tools and how they could be used responsibly to help us prevent cheating without using them inappropriately and accusing students of something that they didn't do. So there was a study, and they found that only 80% of flags that in software across multiple programs that say that something was written in AI are accurate. So a huge number of people are being flagged as using AI who didn't use AI, people who legitimately did their own work and are getting picked up by these software programs. And there were a number of reasons we'll look at for why this is happening. These software programs are looking for certain trends in the writing that it's analyzing. And some of those trends might not be from AI. They could also be from a variety of other reasons that a student might be writing in an unusual style. One common reason is a student who uses English as a second language. They are likely to use grammar and sentence structure that is not completely standard in the United States, but that doesn't necessarily mean they wrote it with AI. It could be because they're just not as familiar with English grammar and sentence structure. It can also turn out that things that are written in an older style or in a something that is not common to modern English can be flagged. Examples would be the US Constitution. It is an old document. It was almost certainly not written by AI, but it is also not written in exactly the way we would talk to each other today because it's an older document. And when it was run through software, it was determined to be, written by AI. So it just shows some of the flaws with these detection software programs, that they're just not a fully accurate way on their own. The reason we've left it turned on at Carlow is that there are valid uses for these detection programs. There are ways to use these that would help you, as long as you understand that they're very flawed and that they have to be used as a piece of a much larger process of looking at your students' work and looking at whether there is an academic integrity issue with that work. Unfortunately, all of these methods of using these software programs responsibly are quite a bit more work than running a paper through a software program and saying, yes, you cheated, no, you didn't, and then making a decision. These are going to require significant analysis, talking to the student, and really looking at what's going on and what could be done about it. So one thing that is very common is that when people use ChatGPT, especially the free versions of these programs, to write papers or discussion responses or things like that for classes, is that there tend to be mistakes. The people who are doing this often are doing it because they didn't do the reading, they didn't learn the content, and so their ability to go through and accurately proofread what they turned in is not always 100%. And ChatGPT and these other AI softwares do not necessarily turn in mistake-free documents. They can have poor writing style. They can have very mechanical sounding writing. They can make up facts. They can say things that are just completely false. So that they just make mistakes. Often when you read papers that were written entirely with, say, ChatGPT, they're just not good papers. So even just reading it on your own, it would probably get a low score in many cases, even without you proving that it was written with AI, because it's just not a high quality paper. There are different types of prompts that are easier to plug into AI. If your discussion board, for example, consists of what is the answer to the question on page 432 of the textbook, that's a fairly cut and dried question, where a computer might be able to look at the information in that question and then figure out an answer. Whereas questions that say, relate your personal experiences with blank, to what we learned about this topic, it's harder for the computer because the computer doesn't have any personal experiences. So it has to make them up. And when it starts making stuff up, that is where most of the mistakes start to come in, because it's just making up stuff that sound plausible to it, but they're not based in reality. And some of these things can be really bizarre if you play around with the software and watch it, just concoct and imagine things that simply didn't happen. So the more these questions are requiring students to really think and to analyze something instead of just spitting back facts, the harder they are for these AI solutions to figure out. Do we have any questions before we go on? Or does anyone have experiences with this that they'd like to share, or any information about what we've talked about so far? Okay. So some of the red flags that we could look for. If you play with ChatGPT or any of these other software programs, it is very common that they come up with just insanely complex or weird sentence structure or weird word choice. It technically is not necessarily wrong, but often it's not written in a way that most students would write, if they were coming up with it themselves. And this is one of the things the detection software is looking for, and also one of the reasons why the false positives are such an issue. Repeatedly using the same words in the same very unconventional way. Once ChatGPT decides that it likes a particular sentence structure, it will often keep repeating it. And again, these are often just very awkward sounding things. If you've come across stuff on the internet, websites or social media posts or whatever that just look weird, a lot of them are probably written with some of this software. The software is not a person, so it has no actual emotion or ability to accurately describe personal experiences. So when you have prompts that ask it to talk about its own feelings or its own experiences, it has to make them up. And the more it starts making things up, the more it starts to make mistakes. Current events. The AI is not like a real-time thing. And especially if the student is using a free version, it can often be a couple of years out of date with its data. So if you ask it about something that happened a week or two ago, it doesn't know. So it's not going to tell you it doesn't know. It's just going to start making things up. It will often invent things that would sound very plausible if you didn't know what actually happened on that date 2 weeks ago. But they're not real. They didn't happen. It just invented stuff. It will do this with all sorts of other information as well. It will make up data. It will make up facts, people, places, dates. It'll just make up all sorts of things to complete the prompt that you asked it to do. And they will sound plausible. They will all be things that sound reasonable if you don't know the topic or you don't realize that these people never existed or that this place and event never occurred. Do the sources really exist? There was a court case, not super recently, but a while back, where some lawyers used ChatGPT, and it just made up court cases that didn't exist. It made up documents that didn't exist. It just made up a whole bunch of stuff, and it sounded plausible. It wrote up a nice bibliography with all the sources cited properly, but they're not real sources. It'll just make up journal topics. It'll make up journals. It will just make up all sorts of things that aren't real. Yeah, here's an example from Luke where he says that a student contacted us asking for help acquiring an article that doesn't exist. And it is very possible that this is something ChatGPT came up with, because all of these models will just they'll invent things that aren't real. They'll just look at what you asked it to do, and if it can't think of something real, it will just make stuff up that sounds plausible to it based on the information it has. And if you don't carefully review this work that it does, it would be very easy for a student not to realize that that's not a real journal or not a real article, or that the person it says who wrote it does not exist. But an instructor could certainly take a look at that information, and you would quickly find out that there is no such person. And if you've read a whole bunch of papers on the same topic, it's likely that you know which people wrote papers on this topic, and that it would jump out to you to see a whole bunch of people in the field that you've never heard of, writing in journals that you've never heard of before. So a lot of these are things to look for. And I think one of the most important ones is this last point. Does the writing match what the student has previously submitted? If a student who is not a great writer and has turned in a lot of stuff in class that isn't that great is suddenly using huge words and super complicated sentences and just writing in a way that doesn't sound like how they usually know how to write, that's a sign that something is going on and that this is probably not 100% their own work. So let's take a look at some other things that we can do. That last slide, what we talked about are ways you can detect these problems after they've happened. But there are also some things we can do in course design to prevent these things from happening. Not 100% of the time, it will still happen, but ways to make it harder for students to do this. And I think before we get into the instructional design, it is important to go back to that first slide where we talked about the enormous percentage of students that were probably doing things like this long before ChatGPT existed. In other words, cheating has existed for a very long time and has been a part of education since education began. So there are tasks that are harder for AI to do, including sharing a personal experience or taking perspectives on issues. So especially with like a discussion prompt, I sometimes come across discussion prompts where every student has the same answer. And the reason that tends to happen is that prompt was written in a way where there's one right answer to that question. The right answer was to read this section of the book, and then to report upon, what the book was saying about that topic. And if you have those types of discussion prompts, then regardless of whether they're using AI or Google or, their friend to find the answer, those ones are much easier to not think about because there's one right answer. You can look up what the answer is. Questions that require your perspective or your experience or for you to interpret things are harder for all types of cheating because you would expect every student to have different experiences and different perspectives, and you would expect to see a lot of different responses. AI has not had these experiences, so anything it says it's experienced, it's making up, and that is likely to cause mistakes or things that would be implausible. Task, yeah, so we talked about this, but discussion prompts should ask students to interpret things or experience something or somehow discuss things that might be unique where people would have different points of view. And one thing you can do to help with this in the discussion settings is Brightspace does have a feature, just like Schoology did, where you can require them to post before seeing what anyone else has posted. Are there any questions so far before we go on to another tool? Or if anyone has something they'd like to share or to add to this, please let us know.
Hey, David, it's Alexis. I just wanted to say, I think that you're making such a strong point there about instructional design being a key component in dealing with this, because as we know, these tools are not foolproof. And I just want to hammer home the importance of us taking the responsibility to design content and assignments that are part of the solution.
Thank you. If anyone else wants to add anything at any point, please just let us know. There are other tools in Brightspace. Clara, yes.
I was just gonna say that I certainly had experience with this, and I thought I was coming at it from an instructional design perspective and designing discussion boards and assignments where students had to write about their own personal experience, and still they were using AI. And so I guess I struggle with that a little bit. It's like I totally get what you're saying and I agree with you. And I even thought, asking students to talk about themselves they should enjoy doing that. Why would they have to ask ChatGPT to do it for them? And yet they did anyway. So I guess, that's where I struggle is, and like you said, it's not 100%. You can't, people are going to cheat no matter what. So yeah, I guess I just want to bring that up as as an example that even with the instructional design in mind, it's still not going to be 100%. And so I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that or ways to even improve upon what I've been doing. I would be all ears. Thanks.
Yeah,
I do have.
Oh,
I'm sorry, go
ahead.
ahead. I do have one thought about that, and we'll get to that right after Jess shares what she wanted to share.
Well, David, I'd love to hear your thought too. But I was just going to say I had the exact same experience, Clara, and I was thinking the same thing as you were sharing that. Where I started to figure out they were using AI was in those assignments where it said share your personal thoughts, because it didn't make any sense, or share your personal experience, or what was your favorite class session we had, and then the AI can't answer that. I think what I'm struggling with is how to have the dialogue with the students about it. Like the last session we had that was helpful from the on this topic was just very positive on AI and working with your students about, talking about how they can use it and knowing that this is being used in the work world. And I'm really, I want to do that too. So I guess it's that balance between what Clara and I are talking about, where they're literally using ChatGPT to answer a question like, which was your favorite class of the semester? Which is, but then how do you have the dialogue with them about it? Or I don't know, that might make a whole other it might make a whole other workshop session, because I'm having trouble talking to them about it to have them have the meta awareness of what's happening.
Right. This is probably not going to be the clear-cut answer you're hoping for. But in the articles that that I was talking about at the very beginning, these two people right here in their papers, although they were discussing teenagers in high school instead of college students, they were encountering very much the same things. And what they were looking at was not just cheating with AI, but all sorts of what they called sort of performing as a student rather than actually like engaging and learning. So people who are getting, high grades and look like they're busy and they're turning stuff in and generally doing okay on tests, but not really putting any effort into actually learning. And they were looking at a number of reasons for this, which are none of them are easy things to fix. But they talked a lot about students feeling engaged and feeling like the topic's important to them, about feeling a connection with the instructor. They talked about students feeling overwhelmed with all of their responsibilities and feeling like there was no way to do all the things that were expected of them. And so they talked about a number of reasons students cited for doing these things. All types of cheating, not just with AI. And it's not an easy problem to solve because those problems, they're still going to exist. There are still going to be students who feel overwhelmed. And I'm sure we have students who feel that way too. Or students who feel like, I don't care about this. I just need to get a credit for this class and like go take stuff for my major. I don't know the answer to that, Alexis. I think that some students might understand they are cheating and some might not.
I also think that it's part of our course design, right? Like I use chat a lot. I use it for idea generation. But if you tell a student, well, even using it for that is cheating because your learning goals are X, Y, and Z, then you're stating you're making, don't make assumptions that they're going to know, because they won't know until we make it clear in our learning objectives what we want them to know. And I think that's the point that I'm trying to make is I don't think they do. And I don't think that they think they're cheating until we make it clear that that's what cheating is in our class.
I would certainly agree that we should make our expectations clear and make clear what we would mark them down for and what we wouldn't. I don't believe Carlow currently has any policies about this, which
no, they
probably
don't.
is not ideal. But certainly it is harder to hold students responsible for something if they haven't specifically been told that they shouldn't do something or that they can't do something.
Yeah, we are going to have Kevin. I'm just going to put a plug in right now where you're advancing to your next slide. We're having Kevin Gannon come in to talk about policy development. And he actually is advocating, rather than having a university-wide policy, to have a syllabus and even down to that assignment-based policy of what is and isn't okay. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say about it too.
All right. It looks like Clara has, there is an AI policy on the UFA agenda, so that's a positive thing. And it looks like she has something else to add as well. And it looks like Jess added one to the syllabus in the BSW program. So that's also a positive thing. I think that anytime we can set expectations in advance and make sure we were clear about what we did and did not want someone to do, regardless of, what breakdown of structure we put that in, I think that's positive because it makes it much clearer that the person who did choose to do it is doing something we specifically asked them, not to do. It looks like Alexis has another point as well.
Yeah, and I definitely want this in writing for our records per se. If I were faculty, I would be very concerned about a university level policy because I would not want that university level policy to infringe on my academic freedoms. I am teaching AI. I am teaching students how to use it. I hope I'm teaching them how to use it responsibly, but I'm also making it clear that my use of it and my teaching them how to use it may be different than another faculty member's use of it. But I would really, really caution us to not create a policy that may infringe on a faculty member's academic freedoms.
I think that's a good point, and that really ties into what I was about to talk about here with the class progress tool, because there are different ways a student could be using AI, and they could be using it in a way where they are simply typing in your prompt and asking it to write the paper. But they could also be using it as a part of their process of thinking about how to phrase something or thinking about, how to tie the thoughts together that they were thinking about. And if the student truly understands the topic, like if they've truly done the work of reading the content and listening in class and doing the things they were asked to do, then they can read what the AI wrote and figure out where the mistakes are and figure out what it made up and what doesn't make sense and all the things that you would be using to catch them using the AI. And if they know the content well enough to truly go through and proofread what the AI did and to find the errors and to think about what's wrong with it, then they probably understand the content pretty well. And at that point, it probably isn't a serious issue because they clearly understand what they were writing, and they could sit down with you and explain what they wrote and why they wrote it and what it means. I think that something that came up in some of the cases that we've heard of with this is the student literally has no concept of the topic that they are discussing. So they can't catch the mistakes. And if you ask them questions about what they wrote, they can't explain or justify what they wrote because they didn't write it. And in those cases, I think that the usage is a problem. And those are also the cases that are easiest to figure out because you can talk to them and see that they have no idea about the topic. They can't explain their paper. They don't understand what was in any of the sources that they're citing. There is a class progress tool in Brightspace, and this tool, it allows you to get very detailed examinations of what a student has or hasn't done. You can go page by page and see whether they viewed your PowerPoints, did they listen to your videos, did they do the things they were asked to do. And in a face-to-face class, you would also have that information because you could tell if they were listening or coming to class or participating. And this is just one more piece. It does not mean that if they didn't view your lecture that they used ChatGPT, but it does mean that it's one more piece of interesting data. They didn't pay attention in class because they didn't look at anything that you posted. They can't explain what they wrote. They wrote stuff that is just wrong. And you can start to put all of these pieces together, and then you could come up with a case that, okay, it does appear that you didn't do the right things because you don't know the content, you didn't do the work, and yet you have this paper of incorrect stuff you turned in that you can't explain. So we're going to take a quick look at this class progress tool. And then we also have a positive thing about AI to look at in Brightspace because it is a really useful tool for instructors that Brightspace is releasing to you. That's not the right one. No. All right, so right here is the class progress tool in Brightspace. And we can click on a student. And if you are not familiar with this tool, we can go through this content area and get a very detailed view. This one is not a real course, so there's not a lot in here, but we can see specifically how much time the student has spent on things. And if this were a real course, there would be a detailed list here of everything the student did and how many minutes and seconds they spent on those things. Again, this is not useful as a grading tool by itself. It would not be fair to say you didn't click this file, you failed the semester. But it just gives you a picture into that student. Are they learning about this stuff? Are they putting time into the class? Do they understand the topic when you talk to them? And there's just a whole realm of information that we can look at and how we designed the course that would just tell us what's going on with this student. You know, is this an honest mistake where they didn't understand something? Or is this something where they just legitimately haven't put effort into the course? We can even see when they've logged in, have they accessed the course? And if they haven't come to the course, then we could make a case that they're not participating in the course. And I think this is the type of evidence you would need if you were going to tell someone they were cheating using AI or any other method. It's this total picture that you could put together. And the automated tools like the one in Turnitin could be helpful from a standpoint of just giving yourself a heads up as to which people you might want to examine more closely. But they certainly can't do this level of research themselves to figure out whether somebody actually did these things. Before we go on to Lumi, is there anything else that anyone has had experience with this or has questions about or wishes we'd gone into more detail with?
No, just great information, David. Thank you for this. I wish we had more faculty participating in the conversation. Thank you, Clara, for being here.
All right, so one positive thing that Brightspace has done with AI, actually there's two. One of them is this Lumi tool that we're going to look at. And another one is if you have used the automated help tool in Brightspace, you may have noticed that it now has an AI component where it attempts to use AI to sort of look at your question and direct you to resources that might be helpful answers. The Lumi tool that we now have in Brightspace is part of Creator Plus, and what it does is it can look at your course content. It will only look at content in your course, not like random stuff out on the web. And it will help you create questions based on content in your course. Brightspace has specified that they plan to limit the tool in this way long term. In other words, they don't want AI just creating course content because it could be wrong, and they don't want AI to just go out on the web and start pulling in, random things because again, it could be wrong. So the way it works in here, there is a bigger session coming up where we'll go into much more detail about this software. But if we go to content and we just take a look at the upload create and the create a file, we do have this Creator Plus icon. And this gives you a number of new tools, not just AI tools. But one of the options you have is this insert practice. And we can create practice questions. And you'll see right here, we have the ability to generate a question with this button based upon course content. And when we click this, if this was a real course with content and pages built out and stuff set up for you to use, which we will have when you if you were to attend our bigger session coming up on Lumi, then it will just create questions for you based upon your content. And that could be a helpful instructional tool for you in creating practice questions for your students, just to place throughout the course. And so these are some examples of positive things where AI could save you some time or help you with work. Just like when students use it, you would need to be careful and read its question and make sure that what it says makes sense, because it could easily be wrong. It could suggest something that, is not a good question, or where the answer doesn't really make sense. Maybe there's two answers that kind of could be right. So you'd have to review it and make sure that it's a logical thing for it to say. But this is a time-saving tool that Brightspace has rolled out. And if you're interested in it, there is training coming up where we will go into much more detail about Lumi and Creator Plus and some of these other tools. Are there any other questions or anything people wanted to share about any of this? Okay, if people do have questions, I'd be happy to talk about them or look at any tools or issues that people are having. And if there are not, then thank you for coming to the session. And we hope to see you at the next section, where we'll go into more detail about other topics.
This was great information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. Thanks.
Thanks, David.
Bye.